Good morning, guys. Today we are going to talk about different types of memories in computers. We are going to discuss about what is a solid state drive, what is a hard disk, what are its different types, and why and when we should pick one, okay, of the two. So this is what we are going to learn today. So let's start with what is memory. In simple terms, according to us, for us humans, what is a memory? For example, when you learn something or when you understand something, that information, for example, let's imagine we are learning about something simple like Ohm's law. Okay, V is equal to IR. It's one of the most simplest and most basic theorems in electricity. So when we are learning such information, we store them in our brain. So our brain acts like a memory system. Our brain has special areas where it's used to store information. Similarly, when we are interacting with the computer, we might need multiple things. For example, you're using your app of Netflix on your smartphone. Netflix has to be stored somewhere, right? Either it has to be stored on Netflix's servers or on your phone or somewhere, right? You need to store that app, the programs, the videos, everything somewhere in order for you to in order for you to interact with it. That's where memory comes in. Okay, in in common terms, memory is where a computer stores data and instructions. It allows your system to boot, to run applications or programs, and even to save files. For example, when you download pirated movies from Telegram, where do you where does your desktop store it, or where does your laptop store it? In its storage, in its memory. They store it in its hard disk or its SSD or whatever it's available. Okay, so memory can be divided into two different types. It's called as primary memory and secondary memory. So this is an image of a RAM stick, which is an example of a primary image. Sorry for the resolution of the image, I got it on a low quality. Next, we have to learn why we need memories. As I said, it determines how fast your system runs. For example, if you have an application ready installed on your phone, it's ready to use. For example, WhatsApp is installed on my phone, so I just have to click on that app, then it loads. Otherwise, if I have to download it from somewhere else, for example, I have to install it from Google Play Store, then I have to run, it takes a lot of time. So instead of that, it stores in my phone's memory so that I can access it whenever I need it. It affects boot times, app loading, and file access. For example, let's imagine this is a Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. This was launched, if I'm not wrong, in 2022. So let's consider a phone from 2022, that is this, and an iPhone released this year. For example, let's imagine the iPhone 16. When you compare both devices, the iPhone 16 is definitely going to be faster. If you ask why, the processor is much more bigger. It has a lot of transistors. It has a better optimized software. All of that are reasons, but the main reason is that it has a better, much more efficiently optimized version of its primary and secondary memories. That is, it uses better versions, higher versions of its memory. That's the RAM and the storage, ROM. Okay, so it affects boot times, because if you are using the latest technology, your boot time reduces by quite a big margin. So it directly impacts user experience on laptops, PCs, and mobile devices. For example, if you're using an i3 7th generation Intel chip and you're using an i3 14th generation Intel chip, you can evidently see the difference. When the moment you press the turn on button, I am telling you, the latest generation Intel chip is going to make that jump, because it's in most case scenarios, it's definitely paired with a better RAM, so it loads things faster. The shift in storage technology. Traditionally, for example, 20 years ago, my grandfather had a desktop computer down there. It used a hard disk. It used the internal HDD or hard disk drives. Modern laptops, like the one from which I'm recording now, uses solid state drives. We'll be going into detail about each category, and we'll be talking about the types and which one you should buy when you're in the market for one, when you are in the market for a storage device. And now let's go about the types of computer memory. As I said before, we have two main types, primary and secondary. Then we also have tertiary and virtual memory. Okay, the first one is for primary memory. Primary memory is fast and it's a kind of a temporary storage. For example, let's take my phone again. This phone has a RAM of 8 GB and a storage of 128 GB. Okay, so you might ask, why can't we put a 128 GB RAM inside this, or or an 8 GB storage inside this? I will tell you the crux of the matter. So the 8 GB RAM is used for running applications. Okay, for example, when I'm using WhatsApp, okay, let's assume my phone is totally clean. When I'm using WhatsApp, my phone loads the WhatsApp application and its necessary data onto my RAM. Okay, so when it's on my RAM, it runs much more quicker, because RAMs are designed to be, our primary memories are designed to be much more quicker. So the applications I need for quick access, they are instantly loaded and loaded off the RAM. So as I said, WhatsApp gets loaded onto RAM when I need it, but when I'm not needing it, my phone automatically closes WhatsApp and it sends it back to the normal storage, because if your RAM is occupied, it might bow down all your other functions and features, etc. So you want your device to be fast and optimum, right? So whenever you need an app, your system transports it, at least the main data, for example the user interface, etc. It transports it to the RAM. We use it whenever we finish using it, or when we close it up, when we clear your memory, or after some idle time. I don't know how much Samsung has said the idle time as. After that, the particular idle time, it gets popped off the RAM. Okay, so that's what RAM is used for. The secondary type is a permanent storage. So I talked about an 8 GB of RAM in my phone. Next, we have to talk about the 128 GB storage. That is the place where all my other files are stored. For example, I take a video of a dog walking around. That video is stored in my phone storage. Or if I'm talking in case of my computer, it's stored in the hard disk or the solid state drive. Okay, all unwanted files, not unwanted files, all files which don't need immediate action, for example, which don't need the fastest of memories, like photos, videos, other programs which are not being used for quite a time. All of these items are stored in your external memory, or not external memory, in your secondary memory. Now let's talk about primary memory. Primary memory, as I said, is volatile. Whenever you're using a particular app, it gets popped onto the RAM, and when you stop using it, or when you're idle for some time, it gets popped off. So as I said, it's faster than your storage, but data is lost when power is off. As a practical note, if you have more RAM, you can use multiple apps at the same time. That's why if your phone has 12 or 16 GB of RAM, you can use a lot of applications at one time, and you don't even need to bother closing it. That is, for example, if you have 16 GB, you can technically use all your apps at the same time. Your RAM wouldn't need to be cleaned off, which your system would act much more passively. So this is a simple classification. I just took it from Google. So primary memory is classified as RAM and ROM. RAM being the smaller, faster memory, volatile memory I mentioned, and ROM being the much more non-volatile version. Okay, these are additional versions. I don't think we don't need to get into the in-depth of things, because it becomes much more difficult. So now let's talk about the main thing. Okay, why we are here? It's secondary memory. So today's focus is on secondary memory. Like, we have two types of secondary memory. One is HDD, that is basically in simple terms it's called a hard disk, and the second one is a solid state drive or an SSD. Okay, so I have mentioned it here as hard disks are traditional magnetic storage, while solid state devices are much more flash based storage. That is, if you ever see a solid state drive chip, it's much more smaller in comparison to a hard disk. Okay, it's much more smaller, it's faster, and it's more costly generally. So whenever you, for example, okay, I'll tell that example to you in the end. So this is another image of the difference between primary and secondary memories. Or if you guys want to have a look, you can just take a pause and look at it. Okay, now let's talk about other types. In simple, other types are virtual memory, that is, it uses part of RAM as an extra RAM. So there is a feature in my phone called memory boost. Okay, I told you I have 8 GB of RAM and 128 GB of extra storage. But if I feel my RAM is not enough, if I want to multitask a lot, Some devices, I don't think all companies offer that. I mean, I don't know if Realme or a Redmi or even Apple for that matter offer such features. I mean, I know it's existing in my Samsung, so I'll talk about it. So whenever I need some extra RAM or extra space, the thing I do is, as I said before, I have 8 GB RAM and 128 GB of storage. I use some gigabytes from that storage to expand my RAM. So I'll take 2 from that 128 and I'll add it to my 8. So basically I have 10 GB RAM and 126 GB internal storage. Okay. Similarly, the other one is ROM. It's called read-only memory. You can store firmware or boot instructions. I mean, you can't rewrite it again. As the name suggests, it's only read-only. Then you have external storage devices like pen drives. You have SD cards. You have I think even you can include cloud-based services also. Google's OneDrive from Microsoft, etc. Now let's talk in depth about HDD or the hard disk drive. Hard disk drives are traditional storage devices which use magnetic spinning disks. If you ever take a hard disk with your, if you ever hold a hard disk in your hand, you can observe that there are a lot of moving parts inside that. I mean, in the older versions at least. It writes data with a moving read/write head. I mean, I don't know the internal workings of that thing, but yeah, this is basically the crux of the matter. So this is how a hard disk looks, and you can see it has a rotating dial on which data is stored, and it's read magnetically. Now, if we are talking about types of HDDs, we have 3 types. That is the desktop, the laptop, and the enterprise HDDs. Okay. I have just mentioned the sizes here. I mean, I don't think it's useful. Most of you guys must be buying laptop HDDs or desktop HDDs. I don't think we need to discuss about enterprise HDDs anywhere, but if you want, you can just jot down the notes. By performance also, it can be graded. So these are 5400 RPM, 7200 RPM drives. But the important thing here is, higher the RPM, higher your read and write speed. So if you're buying a version with higher RPMs, you will get more performance out of it. Okay. Now let's talk about the major brands who are manufacturing HDDs. Obviously we have Western Digital. If I'm not wrong, Western Digital was connected to SanDisk. I think Western Digital acquired SanDisk some time ago. So yeah, both are the same company. We have Seagate, Toshiba, and Hitachi. Okay, these are the main companies who make HDDs. And this is the big question: why are HDDs becoming outdated? Because for the first thing, HDDs are comparatively larger. If you take SSDs into consideration, they can generate some small amount of heat. Sometimes they can be noisy. They have a lot of moving mechanical parts, and the main important thing, they are slower when you compare it to SSDs. Now let's talk about what an SSD is. SSD uses flash memory chips. I mean, so it's basically like a chip, no moving parts involved. I think I might have an SSD lying around here. Let me check. Okay, sorry, I don't think I have it. But yeah, after this video, I might attach it. SSDs are much faster than HDDs for booting, for loading apps and file transfers, etc. And it's more durable since it can withstand shocks, etc. It's basically a card-like design, so you can do such stuff. This is an example of a PCIe 4.0 NVMe M.2 SSD. I'll talk about the specifics later. But yeah, this is an example. Let's talk about SSD types. Okay. As we look here, this is a PCIe 4.0 NVMe M.2 SSD. So we have SATA SSDs, which are pretty large. Then we have M.2, which looks like a small thin chip. I mean, thin means this size, the size of my finger, size like chips. Then we have PCIe/NVMe, and we have external SSDs also. External SSDs are SSDs which you don't, for example, normally we have 2 types of SSDs. One is internal and one is external. The first 3 I mentioned here are internal SSDs mostly. That is, you need to open your computer, you need to plug it into the motherboard using all those connectors and pins. The external SSD is a type of SSD which already has a separate casing, and it might come with a USB-C or a USB-A cable. So you just need to plug it into your computer in order to use that. One of my friends who is a short film director, he uses an external SSD. He connects his SSD to his iPhone so that he can, how do I say it, he can record high quality videos and write it onto the SSD live. Okay, so it's very useful, external SSDs. This is an external SSD, as the name suggests. It already has a casing. These are M.2 and SATA M.2 internal SSDs. This is another M.2 SSD made by Samsung. So I just gave you some examples of how an SSD look. Also by flash technology, these are classified. I have just listed it here. So when we are talking about the leading manufacturers, these are the manufacturers: Samsung, Western Digital, Crucial, Kingston, and Seagate. So I'll give you some personal insight into an SSD because I purchased an SSD I think a month back. So my laptop had a 256 GB Samsung NVMe M.2 SSD, and I upgraded it to a Western Digital 1 TB SSD because Western Digital, when I just checked the specs, Western Digital struck to me as a much more cost effective option. Samsung 1 TB SSDs cost almost something like 8,000, and Western Digital was offering almost the same specs at 6,000, so it felt like a better choice to me, so I went for Western Digital. Okay, so this is I mean, it's based at the end, it's all personal preferences. If you want a Samsung, you can have a Samsung. If you want a Western Digital, you can have a Western Digital. So I have just mentioned everything here. It's a proper comparison between an HDD and SSD, so we'll go through it. SSDs are, I mean, I'll start with HDD. Sorry, hard disks are slower in terms of booting time. They are fragile because they have a lot of moving parts, and they might create audio noises and heat. It uses much more power. They are bulkier and heavier. They are larger in size. They are cheaper, much cheaper. As I said, a 6,000 rupees, 6 to 8,000 rupees will fetch me a good SSD from Western Digital or Samsung. But in that same price, I'm pretty sure I can get a 1.5 TB or a 2 TB hard disk from other companies. Good quality hard disks, okay? They are best known for storing movies, backups, and bulk files. If you have a lot of photos, for example, if you're a person like me who likes to collect photos, who loves to keep them, then you can use a HDD because you don't need to access it so quickly, right? And on the other hand, SSDs are much more faster. They are shock resistant because they don't have any moving parts. They run silent. They are cooler because it's basically a chip, and when it's connected to your motherboard, the fans in your computer take care of that. They have very lower power usage, which makes it best suitable for laptops. And the cons are that they are a bit more expensive than normal. Okay, so which one should you use? As I said before, if you like to store a lot of files like documents, articles, homeworks, photos, videos, movies, etc., then you should use a hard disk because first of all it's cost effective, and second of all you don't need to access all those files so quickly. I mean, any normal reading, even the normal reading speed would be fine for you. And use SSD if you are, for example, if you are a high performance gamer or you love to code or some high intensity tasks, then you should do that. But the perfect example is a hybrid approach. Most PCs or even laptops offer that. For example, one of my friend's laptops has a 1 terabyte HDD paired with a 512 GB SSD. So he uses the SSD to store all his software, for example, his Visual Studio Code, his Adobe Photoshop, his Adobe Premiere, his OS, etc., Linux OS, Windows OS, all the OSs he stores in his solid state drive. Meanwhile, all the files, his videos, his photos, his other games, game files or APKs or whatever it is, he stores them in his SSD. He stores them in his HDD so that he doesn't need it to be accessed so fast. Okay, so taking a hybrid approach is always the best option when you're going for a SSD or an HDD. So I guess that's all for today. Thank you, guys.